Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Let me tell you, this is the third time that I'm recording this video because I felt like I missed a lot of things. So I'm re-recording it and I'm gonna edit it again and then I'm gonna put this video out. So today's video, I will be talking about fairy tales in not much in detail, but I will be talking about the tropes that are present in fairy tales. And I will be dividing this video into three sections. I'll be talking about the good things of fairy tales, the bad things of fairy tales, and how the origin stories were. And I think I have to put a disclaimer first. I will not be talking about all those other fairy tales that you guys are aware of, like Rumpelstiltskin and all the other, I think they are peripheral fairy tales for me. The major fairy tales that I grew up with were princess fairy tales. So I will be focusing on 6 princesses and 6 stories, let's say, and they are Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast, The Little Mermaid, Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs, and Rapunzel. And so without any further ado, I think we should just get on with the video. According to what I have written in my laptop is, fairy tales are a children's story about magical and imaginary beings and lands. That's it. Now we will be talking about the good things of fairy tales. I really think often when we criticize how fairy tales are, we tend to forget they kind of do send good messages to girls out there, and I'm specifically targeting girls. I'm saying girls because the people that I remember that grew up reading these kinds of books were usually girls, and I didn't see any guys reading fairy tales in my country, so I'll be telling girls. So if you're a guy and you read a lot of fairy tales, I'm not trying to exclude you. The first thing that's really awesome about fairy tales is the fact that the girls in these stories are extremely resilient, which is a great message to send. However, I am not saying that girls have to be quiet when they're taking abuse. I do not mean that. What I mean by resilient is the fact that despite everything, they are patient and they go through their hardships. They are very optimistic and they fight their battles head on, which is why I think these princesses are kind of a good example to set to young girls and guys. The next thing that's really good about fairy tales is the fact that these kinds of tales have a sort of animal friendliness towards them. When I read the origin stories of these fairy tales, I did not find, I just found Cinderella being very friendly towards animals. But if you think about the Disney princesses, all of those Disney princesses are extremely friendly towards animals, which is a very good message to send to young girls. The third thing that I really like about fairy tales is the fact that this kind of sends a message that if you are a good person and you're kind, you will be victorious in the end. I'm aware that this is not how things work in real life. However, you can't tell your kids that the world is very unfair because they will be very, very depressed. So I think it's a very good message to send out to young girls that justice will always be served, and if you become a good person, you will be victorious, which kind of encourages young girls to be good people in the future. The fourth thing is the fact that these stories are so simple. So let's say that you want to learn a new language, right? And if you want to learn the new language, if you read these stories in your target language, either your vocabulary will improve or your reading skills will improve. So it's a win-win. So if you want to improve a certain language, then you're very basic, in the very basic, the beginner stage of learning that language, then it will be really, really great if you read these fairy tales. And the final thing that I really like about fairy tales is the fact that they have these magical elements to it, like witches, castle, magic, and I really think reading these kinds of stories as a child, it was very fascinating to me because this didn't happen in real life. But when you kind of read those kinds of things, you kind of speculate, oh, probably this is really possible in real life, and it just makes you think, and which is really, really fun to think about. I'm a very, very I'm a simp for magic systems and magic worlds. I love Harry Potter, I love Mistborn, and I love Avatar: The Last Airbender. So yes, I really think that, you know, these kinds of stories will be very, very engaging to kids because they have magic in them, which is not really possible in the real world. Now we will be talking about the origin stories. Let me tell you first that I found the origin stories to almost all of the 6 stories that I mentioned. However, I did not find the origin story for Beauty and the Beast. I heard that it's like 100-page long. I want my viewers to have a very clear-cut understanding of everything. So I just skipped the Beauty and the Beast part. So when it comes to Beauty and the Beast, we will stick with the Disney version, but all of the others we will stick with the origin stories. So first we will go with Cinderella. What separates Cinderella from all of the other stories that I mentioned is the fact that she has a fairy godmother that appears when she's very distressed, like she cries that she can't go to the ball to see the prince with her stepmother and her stepsisters. And unfortunately, in the origin story, there is nothing like that. What happens is Cinderella is very, very distraught that she can't go to the ball with her stepmother and her stepsisters, and what she does is she stands on top of her grave, her mother's grave, and she starts crying, and she sings some sort of a song, and there are 2 pigeons that actually bring a beautiful gown for her, and she goes to the ball to, you know, dance with the prince. And after when Prince finds the glass slipper in the end, he goes to search for Cinderella, right? And then when he reaches Cinderella's house where her stepmother and her stepsisters are living, obviously Cinderella's not allowed to go try the shoe on, but her stepsisters are obviously allowed to. And what they do is they go inside another room where it's very private, and the first stepsister, she tries to put on the shoe, but her toe is too big. So what her stepmother tells her is you can cut the toe off, because if you cut the toe off, when you become a queen, you won't ever have to walk on your feet again. So what she does is she cuts the toe off, and then obviously the shoe fits, and then the prince takes her away, but the prince is told by the birds that that girl is not the girl you're searching for, and then he goes back and he sees her feet, they're bleeding, so he knows that that's not the real girl that he met in the ball. The same happens with the second one, but what happens with the second stepsister is that her heel is too big, and her stepmother says, cut some parts of your heel so that you can fit in the shoe, and she does exactly that. But the prince figures it out, and in the end Cinderella and Prince, they come together. And during their marriage, there's this wedding, so obviously the stepsisters have completely changed their ways. They're really nice to Cinderella, and they want to get a part of her fortune, and she wants to get on her good side. So what they do is they go to the wedding, and when they go to the wedding, those 2 birds that gave Cinderella her dress, they pluck out their eyes and they become blind for the rest of their lives. So this is not the story that I heard in the Disney, and I didn't even read this version of the story when I was really small. It was just fairy godmother, and then the prince and the princess lived happily ever after, or something like that. The stepmothers, they were stepmother and stepsisters, they were never addressed, but they are addressed in the origin story. The second one is Rapunzel. Rapunzel is 12 years old when the prince comes to her and kind of, tells her Rapunzel, let down your hair. So and the mother, she finds out, her stepmother finds out, and Rapunzel's hair is cut, and she when the prince comes, she puts the hair, she throws the hair down so that the prince can come upstairs, but the witch kind of pushes him, I think, if I'm not wrong. The witch kind of pushes him out of the tower, and he falls from the tower, and his eyes get poked or pricked by thorns, and he becomes blind for the rest of his life. The witch, what she does when she finds out that Rapunzel was betraying her stepmother, she the witch, she is very, very angry, and then she leaves Rapunzel in the middle of the desert for I think a couple of years, I guess, and the prince is searching for for Rapunzel for so long, and then I think he takes a while because Rapunzel already has 2 kids, so it means that like the prince came towards her and then they had sex, so they would not have had she would not have had kids if they didn't have sex. I don't remember the story that I read, but I do remember the movie Tangled, and nothing like this happens, right? The prince does not get blind, he's absolutely fine, they live happily ever after. Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. I think this was one of the more shocking ones for me, because whatever happened with Snow White, she was 7 years old when everything happened. Oh my God, that must be so traumatizing. And not just that, like the prince falls in love with Snow White when she's 7 years old. Looking back, like, you know, at that time, obviously it was considered normal, but looking back right now, it's just so terrifying because I'm 25 and I don't even think about getting married. Like, it's such a troubling thought, and she kind of gets married to her prince when she's 7. It's just so... Anyways, so what happens with Snow White is, like I said, she's 7 years old, and her stepmother gets married to her father, blah blah blah, you all know that. But when the stepmother realizes that she is not the fairest of them all, what she does is she asks her huntsman, I can't really pronounce this word, so she kind of asks her guy to take Snow White to the woods and like kill her and bring the lung and liver of Snow White so that she knows that Snow White is dead. But what happens is, obviously, he lets Snow White go because she's really beautiful, according to the story. What happens is the huntsman like kills a bear and takes the liver and the lung of a bear, of that same bear, and the queen cooks it and eats it. The chef cooks it for the queen and she eats it, which is like so terrifying. This is why like Disney kind of changed a lot of things, because this is really terrifying. You can't really translate that into something very family friendly, like, you know, a Disney movie, right? And what happens next is, so the stepmother, she has like 3 tries to kill Snow White. And I'm not going to go into detail. I will be linking the link down below if you want to read them. The link that I read these stories from, it was said that these stories are not that accurate, and I tried to open the accurate version, but that website did not open, so I am just going with the less accurate version. Anyway, so what happens is she obviously goes to the dwarves, and the queen tries to kill her 3 times, and the 3rd time she's almost successful, but she isn't successful because when Snow White eats that apple is lodged in her throat, and dwarves come back and they're mourning her. They're really sad. They put her in a casket, I guess. I don't exactly remember. And then the prince sees her, and then he's like, oh my God, I can't stop staring at her. She's so beautiful. I want to take her away with me. With much begging, the dwarves let the prince take her away with him. And after that, when that happens, when the carriage is being like dragged, the carriage, it like stumbles against a tree stump, and the apple that's lodged in Snow White's throat, it just, you know, comes out, and then she comes back to consciousness. When the prince and Snow White, they're getting married, the queen is obviously invited, and she's so angry, like she's infuriated, but she can't do anything, right? So she goes there, and she is forced to wear very, very hot slippers, and those slippers are brought by tongs. They were that hot. She's asked to wear them, and then she dances until she drops dead. And I understand this does not happen in the Disney movie. I didn't read this when I read Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs as a kid, and I understand why this could not be read by kids, because it's very traumatizing. I guess it kind of like shows like, oh my God, like people who do me wrong should die kind of attitude, which is so wrong. Now here is where I talk about Sleeping Beauty. So what happens in Sleeping Beauty is that I am not going to go into the details of this story. I will link the story down below. But what happens here is a girl is like, Sleeping Beauty is sleeping on her bed. all right? And there's this king coming from faraway land, and something gets lost, and he sees that big ass castle which is completely abandoned, but he assumes that it's not abandoned, and then he knocks the door, I guess, but no one answers, and he kind of like takes a ladder and goes at the very top of the tower, and then he sees a girl sleeping on the bed, and what he does is he rapes her. And in the story, it's written as, where is it? He gathered the first fruits of love. They couldn't say he had raped her. And she has like 2 kids. I think after 9 months, yeah, so almost a year, she has like kids. And obviously, this is a fairy tale, so the rapist and the rapee live happily ever after. So now next we're going to talk about The Little Mermaid. The Little Mermaid was a very interesting read. I would say, I think that's my favorite story that I read amongst all of them. Favorite one. I'm not saying it's the best, okay? It has many, many problems. But what happens in The Little Mermaid is that she falls in love with the prince, obviously. She rescues him when the ship like capsizes, I guess. And she rescues him, she leaves him on the beach. And she goes to the witch. And I think she hears from someone, from her grandmother, yes, she hears from her grandmother that humans have an immortal soul. And if like mermaids get married to a human, part of the human soul will be transferred to them, and that immortal soul can go to heaven. And thinking, like hearing this, obviously the Little Mermaid is extremely infatuated with this guy, and when she hears the idea of this forever like heaven idea, she gets even more adamant on being with this guy. And she goes to the witch and she drinks a potion to have legs. And the witch, her condition is that she has to get married to the prince. If the prince gets married to another woman, so let's say the prince got married to me on this day, the next day sunrise, the Little Mermaid will die and she will turn into foam. The prince falls for another girl, and the Little Mermaid is very, very like distraught. She's very sad that she's gonna die, but she still does not like do anything. And what her sisters do is they go to the witch again, and then the witch says, in order for the Little Mermaid not to die, the witch gives them a knife, and the witch says, stab the prince with this knife. And if you stab the prince with this knife, if the blood reaches your feet, touches your feet, then you will have your mermaid like fins and your mermaid body back, and you will be alive. Like you can go back to the sea, but the prince will be dead, right? So there is one condition that she has to kill the prince, but she does not kill the prince. She just lets it be, and then the next day she turns into an immortal soul. And I think she's talking to another soul, and the soul says, you did such good deeds that you have a soul right now, and after 300 years you can ascend into heaven. And there are like more conditions. They say, like, if you see a good boy or a good girl, I'm not exactly very familiar with the specifics, but they say if you see a good boy or a good girl like behaving really well, then 1 year will be cut off. But if you see a bad boy, then I think 1 year will be added, or 5 years will be added. I'm not so sure. And also I would like to say that all of this happens when the Little Mermaid is 15 and her crush, the prince, is no more than 16 years old. So basically a story of teenagers. So now we will be talking about the bad aspects of fairy tales. I'm not going to talk about the bad aspects in detail, because some of the details that I will be mentioning in this video have already been mentioned in my Why is Love in Bollywood So Cringy video. They put a huge responsibility on men. How? Men are kind of the ones responsible to rescue women from their terrible environment. In all of the stories that I mentioned before, Rapunzel, Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast, in Beauty and the Beast, the girl is expected to do the dirty work, and in I think in 4 of the 6 stories this happens, right? So is it problematic? I kind of think it is, because this kind of encourages girls to put their happiness on men. In my opinion, you should never ever put your happiness's responsibility on anyone, whether it be man or woman. You should never ever do that. So please, if you are thinking that you will meet this particular person and you will be happy for the rest of your life, this does not happen in real life. And after talking about how like huge responsibility is put on men, I think we also have to talk about the trope of damsel in distress in most of these movies, except for The Little Mermaid. Right here, it's not the damsel in distress, it's the guy in distress. So in 5 out of all of these 6 stories, we can see women being the damsel in distress. So this kind of like puts forth the idea that women are usually the ones who are in trouble, and someone needs to come and rescue them rather than women rescuing themselves. I'm aware that these stories are like so old and they have been retold from like generations, but if you read those stories right now, and you will be programmed into thinking that, you know, women are like women, if women are the damsels in distress, then men are the ones responsible to take them out of that misery, which is not like true at all. After talking about how like men should be the rescuer and women should be the damsel in distress, I think we can now talk about how like traditional gender roles are, you know, put upon both of them, where man is like the masculine one, the rescuer, the savior, whereas the woman is the damsel in distress. This is problematic because I really think that if you perpetuate gender roles within a society, then I don't really think that women can go beyond a certain category, certain boundary, and men can't go beyond a certain boundary. So if you push gender roles, you're kind of saying like men should more be like this and women should more or less be like this, which is a terrible thing to say, because obviously we have like different upbringings, we think differently, we are human beings, and we all are in a gray area, right? So you can't really like put a boundary around them and say like you can't go beyond this boundary. So what can be done amongst all 3? I'm not saying completely remove like the guy rescuing the girl. It's a very interesting story to read, like, oh my god, a handsome prince like rescued a girl. But I really think that sometimes there should be stories written on how the girls saved themselves with their wit and their charm. And I'm aware that there are stories like this, but when it comes to like fairy tales, because there are princesses and usually girls associate themselves with princesses and like very beautiful girls, so I think it's better if we make the girls rescue themselves and, you know, rising up against the injustice that they faced for so long. I think that would be a better story to read, because I think this will kind of send the message that no matter what, if you are going through torture and abuse, you should always speak out. The other trope I don't really like in these fairy tales is that a girl, the female protagonist, is kind of made special because of her beauty. So we can see amongst all of them, right? All of the stories that I read, the girls, the female protagonists are very, very good looking, very beautiful. I'm aware that if you don't have like stereotypically attractive characters, then no one will read it. I think mentioning the beauty of a person is kind of a one-dimensional way to write a story. So when I read like these kinds of stories, and if you ask me, so what can you say about Cinderella, right? What did you read? I'm gonna say she's beautiful and she's kind, right? What apart from that? And how are they mentioned like beautiful most of the times? The guy falls for the girl because she's beautiful. The girl falls for the guy because he's handsome. And the stepmother is jealous because of the girl's beauty. So how can you remedy that? Well, just don't talk about the beauty of the girl. Try to develop characters. Try to have like distinct, special like personality within characters. That is how you make the character interesting. The next 2 problems are Happily Ever After and Love at First Sight. I have talked about these 2 tropes extensively in my Bollywood video, so I will be linking it down below if you're interested to watch it. But I'm just going to talk about these 2 in very, very brief. I really think that in these stories, the falling in love of two characters is just reduced to one thing, and that's sexual attraction, which is again a very, very lazy way to write a story. Love at first sight is the lazy way to develop the love of two characters. And the other one is the happily ever after. So yeah, the stepmother died and they lived happily ever after. No, that does not happen in real life. You get married, you have kids, you have marriage problems. This is why people go to marriage counseling. They have problems with their kids. Their ideas clash when it comes to raising kids. Maybe their in-laws are not good. You know, there are so many problems to be addressed. I'm not saying like tell the entire story like an autobiography. No, but just retire the idea of happily ever after. I really think that these kinds of stories should kind of have an open ending. I know these are fantasy stories, but like kids read them and then they have like these preconceived notion of what adulthood is, and oh my god, so you meet this special person and then you're happily ever after, which is so wrong. And I don't really think that kids should be indoctrinated into thinking these kinds of terrible things about life and adulthood. I think they should be made aware of adulthood in very subtle ways without making them distressed. The other problem is the racism. Again, I'm not going to talk about this very extensively. The instance of racism that I mentioned in Snow White is, you know, who's the fairest of them all. So fair equals to white. So how do you remedy that? Well, don't just say like only white girls are beautiful. Don't say that. Have some princesses with darker skin tones in your stories. If I see someone like myself on the screen, I will be able to relate to that person, because media often portrays beauty as one thing, right? When it's not that one thing. We have diversity everywhere, whether it be body size, whether it be skin color, whether it be whatever, whether it be sexuality, right? So have diversity in your protagonists. The other thing is the birth mothers are usually missing in these stories. I wonder why. The other thing is villains are usually females, except for Beauty and the Beast. Why just women villains? Why aren't there men villains? Only women are the problem. When you put a woman who's evil as a villain, and the good woman is pitted against the evil woman, this will like reinforce the idea that women are basically of two types. There is basically this evil one who's so resentful and she only wants bad things for others, and you know, all those kinds of things. And you have this other good woman who's like the damsel in distress. You know, she tortures all kind of abuse and everything, and she comes out victorious in the end. So if you want to be, you know, victorious, and if you want to be a good person, you have to be like this woman, which is very problematic. I think this trope is one of the most problematic tropes I have seen in Bollywood movies and even in fairy tales. I think we should completely retire this idea. How can you retire it? Well, give villains motivation, better motivation. Don't just make the women villains jealous of her stepdaughter's beauty, which is so lazy, by the way. The other problem is that these kinds of stories kind of insinuate that only good-looking people get their happily ever after. So if you remember all of the protagonists in these stories, obviously the Little Mermaid does not get her happily ever after, but of the other stories, they do get a happily ever after. But the Little Mermaid, even in the Disney movie, however, she gets a happily ever after, and they're all very beautiful. So it kind of insinuates that, you know, average-looking people don't have a happily ever after. If you want to remedy it, I really think that we should retire this idea of happily ever after. I think we need to have more open-ended like stories rather than this, completely closing it, right? Happily ever after. I want more bittersweet endings in my stories, because if it's realistic, then I'll be able to like relate to it. If it's not, then I'll be like, it's a bullshit story, I'm never gonna read it again. I just have a question here. What is it with the villains wanting to be the most beautiful woman in the world? The other thing is the abuse that girls go through in these kinds of stories are terrible, and I don't like the fact that they don't raise their voices. I really think that when you write those kinds of stories, I really think that the girls and people who go through that kind of abuse should raise their voice, because because of the fact that these kinds of stories have a happy ending and they are rescued by the prince, this kind of sends the message that, okay, if you want to have a happily ever after like Cinderella or all the princesses that you read about, you basically have to be quiet even through all of the torture and abuse that you go through, which is a very, very problematic message to send to young girls. So how can you remedy that? Well, if there is injustice going on, make the girl speak out. If she speaks out, and make her like escape the world, you know, I think that's the best way to do it. Okay, the final thing is in Sleeping Beauty, the man rapes the girl, and then the girl has 2 kids, and he comes back to the girl and then he says, I raped you, those are my kids. And she was like, oh my god, I'm so happy to have you back. Listen, I'm not laughing because it's funny, I'm laughing because it's traumatic, and I can't believe that these kinds of stories were written back in the day. It's a very, very, very terrifying message to send to young girls, because that is rape. And how could it be remedied? Well, you know, you shouldn't have written it as the rapist and the rapee living happily ever after. I think it should be more like the girl leaving the king and then going on her own and raising the kids on her own, because she was raped, right? But they live happily ever after in the end, despite the guy raping the girl. This also sends the message to young guys, right? Like, you rape the girl and she has 2 kids. Yeah, she's gonna be fine with it. She's gonna welcome you back with welcome arms. No, that's not gonna happen in real life. If you rape a girl, if you rape a guy, you are fucked for life. You are a criminal. And thank you very much for watching. I really, really appreciate it. If you like this video, like it, comment, subscribe, whatever you want. Honestly, I'm very, very happy that you're watching this video, and I'll see you next time. Ta-da!